Good afternoon, everyone. We are very glad to be here to have a discussion with you about Asian cross-border investment. We still have one panelist to come. I know he's here, but I think he will be here very soon. So at this moment, I think we just start the self-introduction, and then when Mark is here, so he can do the introduction, and we can start the panel discussion right now. William?
Yeah.
Would you go first?
Yeah, okay, all right, yeah.
Thank you.
I'm William Day. I'm a founding partner at Xianbei Capital. Xianbei Capital is a Silicon Valley-based venture capital firm focusing on medtech. And so we established the fund about 3.5 years ago. We have invested 22 companies. And luckily, we already sold one company, and we received 2 offers for a second portfolio company. And also, a couple of companies will also complete our Series B and Series A with the leading PEs and the big VC firms to lead the round. So we are actually doing very well. Before I established the fund, I was in healthcare sector for about 20-some years, mainly with Boston Scientific, some other pharmaceutical and medical device companies. I was a CFO for a couple of 2 New York Stock Exchange companies. And so I'm very happy to spend some time to share my experience with you guys today. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Eric Wu. I'm the BD manager of Keto Pharma. Myself, I worked for J&J for 6 years before starting my consulting company. Then 3 years ago, I joined Keto Pharmaceutical. So Keto in China is one of the largest pharma company in China. So in China, we have more than 200 products on the market. But generally, we are more like a generic drug company before. So about 4 years ago, we are transferring to a more innovative drug company, like most of the Chinese companies is trying to do now. So in US, we have now 3 R&D centers in Boston, Seattle, and San Francisco. Overall, we have more than 60 scientists working on innovative drug product. And as an BD team, I'm based in Princeton, New Jersey. So we are looking for different, flexible ways to work for the US biotech company or other biotech company looking for innovative drug product from early stage IND enabling to phase 2A, phase 2B. So welcome the opportunity. So if you have interest, I'm definitely interested to talk with you. Our focus is more China market, but we also can discuss the global rights for some early stage companies. Glad to be here today, so looking forward to this discussion. Thank you.
First of all, I have to apologize for being late. I was working on a cross-border deal. It was pretty exciting. My background is both went through the medical device industry, companies like Symed, early stage American Medical Systems. Then did my own startup companies, Anchigard, Industem. Then I was lucky enough to be able to be part of one of the founders and raised the initial capital and was the executive director for the GCIC, the Global Cardiovascular Innovation Center in Cleveland Clinic. And once that was established, the China Academy of Science called me up and said, hey, would you like to come to Shanghai and do that? in China, and that's what I did. So we have Denova was an incubator before it was anything, and now we have about 300 engineers all over China, particularly in Shanghai, working at the incubator. But it turns out the incubation model is a tough model to make money on, so we raised a fund, and then we're on Denova 8 right now. But our model is, we've always done only one model, and that model is to invest in U.S. or Israeli-based technology, and in parallel, transfer or develop that technology in China. So one of the companies you may know, like Broncos Medical, that was a U.S. company we brought to China that'll be going public next year. Another company we founded was Venus MedTech, which is the first TAVI company that got approval in China, and that will be going public in December on the Shanghai and the China stock market. So our model is to really find really disruptive technologies, invest in them in the U.S., and also help them establish themselves in China.
So my name is Yao. I work with Life Capital. Life Capital, we're a relatively young firm, founded in 2015, but we were able to raise two relatively large funds, totaling $720 million US. With our most recent fund of 420, we are advancing our interest in kind of expanding. Primarily, our fund one was focused on China investments, primarily later stage platform type technologies, revenue generating, and we would help them with cross-border partnerships. That endeavor worked very well for us, and we were able to deploy our initial $300 million quite rapidly in about a year and a half. And in May of last year, we closed our $420 million fund. For our $420 million fund, we are continuing to invest in Chinese late-stage healthcare companies, but we're also looking at investing in U.S. companies. As a matter of fact, we've made three investments so far, one in Chicago, one in Boston, and one in San Diego, all of them in therapeutics. And we also have recently brought on two venture partners to help us drive some investments here in the U.S. One goes by the name of Samir, and he was originally from Illumina, and then another individual named Ke Ting, and she was originally from Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, right around this area. So, and both of them are driving our investments now. And with them on board, we're targeting products as a lot more earlier as well. Pre-IND, we look at things as early as pre-IND, but ideally, I think, hopefully with some proof of concept from a therapeutic side. Now, our fund is actually, we allocate our funds a third, being in pharmaceutical, medical device, and diagnostics. And I think there are two levels to work with Life Capital on. One is an investment standpoint, in which case our minimum buy size is about $5 million up to $40 million. And there's also a partnership standpoint, which is entrepreneurs could choose to work with our portfolio companies as well to have a strategic partner, and those could fall under a joint venture, some sort of licensing, some sort of distribution, or even acquisition sorts. So, and currently we're working on several deals on that front as well. So, and thank you guys for having me on the panel.
Great. Oh, okay, it's my turn. I'm from MedChao. We are doing investments, and also we do the consulting. It's kind of a combination, very kind of weird, but we have similar business model as Mark has. And the companies we do the investment majorly in medical device, because I live in Minnesota, and also we do diagnostics. Some of those are biotech. And for the stage of the company, we do the Series A, B, or C. That's typically we do not do the seed. But it's because if the technology is not that difficult, but there's a very good business model for seed, we can consider it. And we do the investments, but we realized money is not the only issue for the startups. Most important resources. If you have a big resource, good resource, and either financial resource and also this strategic resources. That will really help company grow bigger and faster. So the companies we did investment mostly, we do the investment and also we have the collaborations with the key investors in this area, like in China or some in US. So with those big investors, so the companies we did investment can leverage their capability to expand commercially successful. So that's our strategy. I think now I think I have some questions that we think that might be interest for you, and I try to ask questions for our panelists, and those are experts in both medical device and biotech area. And after these questions, and then so we could we can have like 10 minutes for all of you to have more questions to us. Because this is an Asia cross-border investor panel. Asia, I think a lot of those people here are really Asia means China. Sometimes we have borders like Japan or Singapore, but this time mostly it's China. And everyone knows that maybe you smell something or heard something, there's something that's really happening between US and China recently. And investors are very sensitive about this change. So I will ask questions about this. So describe in brief what the funding landscape looks like in your particular domain. And in your view, has this landscape changed recently? At first, I will ask Mark.
Okay. Go to the old guy. It actually used to be, you can remember a few years ago, that you could actually move yuan into the United States. We would make a petition, we'd ask the central government in China if we could move money usually from Shanghai to investments that we wanted to make in the States. And in certain instances, a while ago, it was a phone call. And that has, over the past 2 to 3 years, has changed radically. It is very difficult to impossible to get approval to move yuan into outside of the borders of mainland China. And I think that has really produced a lot of changes in how we do things in China. And the biggest change now is we sort of have to work primarily with U.S. dollars to get any investment out of China, or it's got to be offshore China, offshore Hong Kong dollars now. So that's been the fundamental change.
Okay, that's great. Eric, the market is kind of specialized in medical device. I like to see Eric is more specialized in biotech. What is his view?
But we are a pharma company, so I think probably the fund manager can share more. But for us, we are, we haven't, feel much different for now. Although I know the recent U.S. CFIUS, new regulation proposed. For now, we probably just wait and see how the new policy will affect the biotech investors from China. For us, basically, because we have a large export business, I think our revenue from export is about $400 million every year. Of course, we can have some money overseas, outside China, but most of the money have to go back to China. So for the small investment, like several million, we are okay. But for the bigger investment, we have to get the money outside from China. But it was not an issue for us. It just basically probably delay the investment compared to some other companies we have the money overseas. So we need some, more time if we do the deal. We let the U.S. company knows have to give us some money to get the money ready. So that's the situation for us. We don't have a company VC arm, so our money is it's just one pool of money for BD for investment. Usually we do the licensing. We can also invest some minority equity investment to the company for some options we can execute later on. So that's I think the situation for most of the Chinese companies. For us, because we have this overseas business, exporting business, we are more flexible. But for some other local China companies, although they want to do deals in the U.S., the money, the dollar for them is really, I know it's an issue. So let's, just something I can share. Thanks.
Yeah, great.
And just to clarify, I think there are two barriers to get investments abroad. So to add a little color, right? Before getting money out of China, getting RMB translated into US dollars, you have to go through central government to get approval before the bank will release the funds in US dollars. The backup really happened around October 2016, where the Chinese government all of a sudden decided to stop outflow of RMB. And that was primarily stem corruption out of China, which is a lot of this money going out of China to either invest in, to essentially money laundering, right? It was a way to prevent that. And around maybe mid-2017, late 2017, the Chinese government started loosening these policies. And I think by now, if you want to get a deal done, there are still ways to get it done. But the problem is just how many hoops the Chinese company will have to jump through to get it done. Now, recently, Trump has actually also added the second layer, which is CFIUS. And what CFIUS now demands is they want to make sure that there are no governmental entities tied to investment in U.S. companies. And right now, it's I think on November 11th is when they're going to start the pilot program. And so things are still up in the air. We're still really unsure on how CFIUS is really going to impact how this investment is. But there are certain industries that's it'll be clearly difficult to get stuff done in, right? And right now the expectation is CRISPR. If you do anything CRISPR, no Chinese company is going to really be able to invest in that. If you talk about anything with genomic data, the genomic data generally would have to remain. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, these guys certainly have more experience than I do. So that's another area that might be a no-go. But all the other things, I think things are up in the air. As U.S. laws are, sometimes it's very nebulous and very undefined. So and up to the interpreter. But right now, that's how things stand.
Certain chips too.
Chips. Oh well, this is in the healthcare space, right? So once we talk about other things, I mean, shoot.
No, but the boxes have chips in them that we able to.
Yeah. But I think on top of that, China has responded sporadically as well, which is some of our portfolio companies have had problems with importing of products into China, and some of the shipments actually had to get canceled, even though it was a completely okay thing to do prior. So, but things are still in flux. But frankly speaking, it's not to fearmonger or anything here. But if a deal wants to get done, it will get done. So it's just how much flexibility both companies have to get it done. So just to clarify that one. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if you guys agree.
Yeah, I think yeah, right. I mean, actually, for most medical device products, we are not in the category of the control by U.S. government. So I think we see a little impact actually on our deal. So we invest in most U.S. companies, right? And so I think for the past few years, there's a trend that more and more Chinese medical device company actually they have started looking for deals in the technology in the U.S. And all those medical device company actually buying U.S. companies. And I think, so one of the companies we actually sold to the Chinese medical device company. And I think that trend will continue. And in terms of investment from VC perspective, as long as the funding actually is not from Chinese government, yeah, okay. So I don't think you are actually impacted by the law. So we are very careful. We don't take any Chinese government money. Because I think about a few weeks ago when we decided to invest in one of the medical device company in the US, so the CEO first question was asking whether your money actually is from Chinese government. We say no. We all from individuals. So we are very careful. We are not taking any Chinese government. So that's I think that really also really help us actually. I think moving forward, if we look at the growth in China, the medical device sector still is fast, one of the fast growing sectors. I think the U.S. probably only 5-6% year-on-year growth, but if we look at China for the past 15-20 years, it'll be 15 to 20% year-on-year. So for the next 10-20 years, China still will continue to grow very fast. So we see tremendous potential.
Great. Great discussion. I think, for the companies over here, I think first, when you are looking for the investments, I think it's really there are different strategies. We know that China there's a big market there. Commercially, every company wants to go to that market. But at this moment, I think you need to think about your investment strategy. Which like the U.S. investor need to be more, or Chinese investor get more. So that's need to think more. But eventually, like William said, the future, China is a big market. It is a big market. No matter you or someone else, once that's a big market, it's going to get in. So don't get panic. Just need to be careful. Okay, our next question is about the cross-border investment interest. So do you prefer investments in U.S. or do you prefer investment in other countries? William, please.
Yeah, definitely in the U.S. I think we found the most disruptives, most original technologies, from the U.S. And I think it's amazing, how many new ideas, new technology you can see actually. A lot of good technologies from Silicon Valley, from Southern California, and also medical device also from Minnesota. But definitely we are really, I think, we love the technologies here, and also if we look at those entrepreneurs in the U.S., they are much more. I think they are working really hard. They are really original and very innovative. And also, I think that the valuation of the deal is very reasonable compared with the deals in China you can get or anywhere else. So similar deals. So I just give an example. So we look many deals in the U.S. But in the same time, we also got some pitch decks from China with similar technology. The technology is much worse than the technology in the U.S. The valuation was at least 3 times larger, more expensive, 3 to 5 times. So definitely, I think we see the technology, we see the value to invest in the U.S.
Great, thank you. Yao, would you talk about the same question? The cross-border investment interest.
So you can look at it from 2 perspectives, right? There's certainly the innovation angle, and on the medical device side, I think William is completely on point. On the pharmaceutical angle, I think so. The 2 sides is you have innovation and you have commercial ability, right? On an innovation side, clearly innovation is still here in the U.S. And regardless on if you're a therapeutic company or if you're a medical device company, the U.S. is where all the action occurs. And if you look at Life Capital and our portfolio companies, if the company is looking at innovation, then the U.S. is certainly the first place we're going to look. But then there's a second question of commercial I think since several of our portfolio companies are generally a little larger, some of them might also be looking for commercial availability and being able to have a launch pad in that specific country to enter into the global markets. And that being said, I would say from a medical device front, Europe is a lot more attractive in that space on acquiring a European company to use that as a launch pad to enter the rest of the world. And in the pharmaceutical space, I would say it's also up in the air. I think due to CFIUS, I think a lot of the other companies don't necessarily want to deal with that and deal with the long lead times required to be able to accomplish that. So now we're seeing quite a few of our portfolio companies just moving away from the U.S. market and just starting off either in Europe or some other country. But I think from an investment standpoint, from an innovative investment standpoint, it's certainly still here in the U.S. and that has remained unchanged.
Yeah, great, thank you. Thanks. So our next question is, how is the biotech or medtech industry different in the U.S. versus in Asia? What are the differences in the indication and the types of technologies that are being sought? I would like to get Eric and Mark to answer this question. One is biotech, the other is medtech.
Sure. So for the China, so you talk about comparative medtech or biotech or?
It's how is the biotech or medtech industry different in the U.S. versus in Asia?
Oh, okay.
What are the differences in the indications and the types of technologies that are being sought?
Yeah, definitely talk about the China and the U.S. So a lot of differences. Basically, I think it's a market driven. A lot of times it's patient population driven. So for example, one of our focus is oncology. And in U.S. and China, the indications could be quite different. In China, a lot of the GI cancers because of maybe the eating habit or so the GI like the gastric cancer and or the liver cancer in China is a big deal. A lot of patients, but in U.S. You don't see a large population of that. Although in U.S. we probably have a big prostate cancer patient, but in China, it's not many. So, so for us, because for now, the focus is still the China market. So when we come to the U.S., we're looking for the drugs, applied to a China market. So, for example, for the cancer, we're looking for liver cancer drugs and gastric cancer drugs. So for these, I think the U.S. company, the biotech, are really willing to collaborate with us because we can find a bigger population in China for clinical trials. And for the U.S. market, a lot of the other advanced indications, like a lot of orphan drugs, right? So you have a big market, a good market here, but in China. Although we've been talking about orphan drug, for a long time, it's still a policy making. It's coming, but until now, we don't spend a lot of time looking for an orphan drug just because the market. Although there's a big unmet medical need in China for this. And for the gene therapy or cell therapy, so this is. In China and the US, both are very hot, just because in China, traditionally, biology is quite advanced compared to some other, like chemical or chemistry. So they have the base, they have the talents in China, can do this kind of research. So you see the CAR-Ts or the gene therapy are quite advanced in China. Also because the policy is relatively loose in China, so you can do a lot of doctors in hospitals, you can recruit a patient as an alternative treatment, so you can do that. So that's why a lot of US gene therapy or CAR-T, I talked to some of the companies, they would like to go to China for these kind of clinical trials. So basically, it's dependent on the policy, the market, and the patient population. So overall, when you do the cross-border transactions, you know, you have to consider all of these factors.
Okay, I'll break my answer up into two sections in the med device, med tech. If you have like a capital equipment in China, for example, like a medical laser or something like that, something that costs $150,000 to $1 million or $2 million, I would much rather sell into the China market with the capital equipment than the U.S. market. It's very difficult in the U.S. market because you pretty much have to sell hospital by hospital. In China, a few years back, they put about $41 billion into hospital infrastructure. So right now, a lot of these hospitals still have very healthy, large capital equipment budgets, and they don't have these committees. It's the key opinion leaders in the hospitals, it's the guys who run, doctors that run their departments that make that decision, and they don't have these long cycles like the US. So if you gave me a piece of capital equipment and asked me where I'd want to sell it, I'd go to China first. Because once you kind of get that, the CFDA approval, and you also, we work with some of the government, it sort of happens. The doctor says, "Oh, I want that," or "Give me, leave that here, and I'll give you a check." Versus in the States where it takes 6 months to a year. So that may change, but right now that's the way it is. On the disposable side, for some reason everybody thinks that something's got to be cheap for China on the disposable side. And what we found is that no matter what's produced domestically or brought in, the China market on the disposable medical device side is actually quite high. And it is, if you look at the United States reimbursement and all that you can usually, the average selling price is higher in China than it is in the States and in Europe. And so that is just something that I think this calculation that most people have, that it's pretty, medical device market is pretty healthy, in China. Because also there's government reimbursement through the government, but then there's also private reimbursement. So that mix usually is pretty turns out to be advantageous to a company that's selling disposable medical devices.
That probably, I think that would be the inefficiency of China distribution chain. I think most surprised to see most of medical device prices actually are higher than in US.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. I have next questions for Yao and William. Okay, so the question is, the investment strategy and the deals that have worked and have not worked in your experience.
So I can share some experience. Yeah, I think still, when we look at the deal, and we first to see whether the technologies are disruptive enough. If the technologies are very disruptive and very original, and could tremendously improve patient outcomes. So that's one of the most considerations we'll give when we make a decision to invest or not. And secondly, I think we analyze the market and to see how the potential market for the product. Sometimes the technologies are very good, but the market is not big enough. And so that sometimes also doesn't make sense for us to make that investment. And then I think we would look at the founder's experience, whether the founder has sufficient price experience in the sector, and whether they have successfully run the startup and exit successfully, and whether the entrepreneurs have prior experience in a major medical device company, so on and so forth. And so I think all those factors, and we usually, I think we are very carefully considered, but in the most importantly, that we are very value conscious. So we want to make sure that we don't overpay. We always try to make investment very consciously in the price, the valuation of the company. And I think if we stick with those principles, and usually we'll do well. And I think we are very young VCs, but we have been doing quite well. So right now we sold one company and we received two offers for our second portfolio company, and quite a few companies we are already ready for US IPOs. And so I think the bad experience I want to share that, don't try to invest in any startup too far away. And I think that's also a very good lesson. So because I think if you invest in a company too far away, it's very difficult to have a very close communication with that company. And whenever you hear some news or anything goes wrong, it's really hard. So I think I try to keep all those portfolio companies nearby.
So, excuse me, what do you mean nearby? Because here we have startups over here, all over the US at least. So you mean that nearby is you only do the investment in California? Or
I think
West
also,
Coast?
actually, I think the most favorite places is still Silicon Valley. I think the mentality there, I think a little bit different from other regions. I think I really, I think probably, if I have to choose, the Silicon Valley is still the best place to invest in early stage startups. And then I think Boston area could be also a very good one. Some of the areas actually people are equipped with very entrepreneurial spirit, and I think you can work very easily with those people. And but if you invest in some very some areas which a lot of people, they don't really, the environment is not very startup driven. They don't have a kind of a mindset. It will be difficult. So that's based on our experience.
Okay, great. Thank you. Young, please.
So I'll break it down in two levels. The first level is life capital investment. So whenever we make an investment, I think with any investment, the people is what makes the company, right? If the people are workable, if they're open-minded, if they have a vision, right? Even if that vision is flawed, and you could say that they're open-minded and willing to take constructive criticism, that is a crucial thing we would want to look at in an executive. Because if they are too headstrong in one direction, I mean, it might be a different investment strategy to find a very headstrong individual that has the ability to raise round after round after round. But I think there is some input that we want to make sure we want to put into a company, and hopefully it will receive a positive reception. If not, be open-minded about it. Second thing we want to look at is market, right? Clearly, we have, as an investment firm, our objective is to make returns for our LPs. And we've got to make sure it's a sizable market and we could generate the returns for it. And then comes the technology and kind of the match with the executives, with the team, right? And sometimes if it doesn't match well, I mean, we could possibly implant or we could replace certain people in the organization, which goes back to kind of the people, which is how open-minded are they and how open are they to kind of let someone else take the reins of the company. And then most importantly is evaluation. Again, our objective is to make financial returns for our limited partners. And our limited partners could be individuals, it could be foundations, it could be philanthropic organizations. And it could be various entities that invested in us because they believe in our returns. And that is something that we certainly, the general idea is, and it kind of goes back to people again, right? If the person is just, not to use a G word, but if they're greedy about kind of the valuations, I mean, there's no way around it, right? Even if we are in love with the technology, we're in love with the team, if the valuation aren't there, we'll have to walk away. Now, from a partnership perspective, which I could offer a little more insight on in terms of strategic investment, there are various that we work on. And things that make it work is a little more nebulous and a little harder to attain. But I would say, I'll give an example, right? One of our portfolio companies was looking to in-license a product. And just coincidentally, after looking at the hundreds of deals we normally see, we were able to identify one company that was completely in the wheelhouse of what the chief scientific officer was focusing on before at his prior life. He knew he wanted to bring this in. He knew he wanted to drive this asset forward, and we in-licensed it in, right? That's an example of something that just by pure coincidence, things just were very aligned, and we just had to get it in, right? But things that don't work out, a lot of the time, occurs for various reasons, right? From a partnership standpoint, again. One of them is pricing. Whenever a Western company wants to enter the China market, although there are exceptions to the rule, generally the idea is in China you could sell something you have to sell it at a lower price because the tendering system in China is such that you have to compete with existing market products. Even though if the clinical efficacy is a lot better, you still have to compete with that. So things have worked out where the cost of goods were too high. It might not have made sense in the China market. Things were, the company wanted to price the product at too high of a price point that they couldn't get it in the market. You could say that the expectations were too high as well, that they might have bought a research analyst report about China and they are constantly quoting this one phrase from that research report stating that the China market is a $100 billion, I'm exaggerating here, but a $100 billion market, and you say I could capture 1% of the market is $1 billion, but in reality right now it's not $1 billion, right? Right now it could be, right now if you were to capture 1% of the $1 billion market, you're not getting that, it doesn't work out, right? So just the expectation is not there. And frankly speaking, it's actually, you need to find a trusted party to work with to be able to really know what the China market situation is, right? And not to bash on the research reports, they're great to gain a very basic metric, but we've seen a lot of people come up and look at this research report and come back to us and say, hey, this is how big the market is according to this. But in reality, if we do the market research, if we talk to the physicians, if we talk to the company CEOs that are in this market, the market clearly isn't that big. So just kind of set your expectations, and just because of those expectations, deals have not worked out. So.
Yeah, great. That's very good advice. I think I have next questions for all of us, and maybe a startup over here have interest to know. So the question is, what are you currently looking for within the biotech or medtech space? Starting with Yuan, please.
I think we are really, like therapeutics, and I think the devices, we are actually, for the past 5-10 years, there are few medtech-focused VCs, actually. And so we take advantage of less competition. And really, I think we can really choose and pick some of the great technologies. The therapeutics, and I think the cardiology and the neurology, and I think we look at almost everything, and but mainly for therapeutics.
Great. Eric?
Yeah, for us, basically we are looking for the asset aligned with the Qilu's pipeline in China. The several therapeutic areas, including oncology, anti-infectious disease, also the CNS and ophthalmology. So we have the strong development, also the commercial capability in China. For us, so we are not looking for very innovative, like first-in-class drugs. So that's probably too much for our appetite. Our strategy most likely Same with other Chinese companies, like fast follow-on kind of strategy. So we know the asset is de-risked by some other companies' clinical development POC data. So we can catch up very fast. So that's the asset actually we are looking for. It doesn't mean in the future we are not doing the first in class, but at the moment, from business side, try to be de-risked, and also looking for the asset to have a bigger market in China. So even though it's a good drug, but if the market is small, so we're probably not our top priority. So that's basically our strategy.
Okay. Thank you. Mark.
Our strategy, it sounds pretty simplistic, but we look for segments of the medical device market that don't currently exist in the China domestic market. So for example, if you looked back 2 years ago, there was no domestic Chinese pacemaker company. Now there's two. There's Medtronic did a venture with LifeTech, and they're producing their own domestic pacemakers, and MicroPort just bought a European pacemaker company. But 2 years ago, that market was not occupied by any domestic Chinese player. So those are markets that if you can establish early on. Another market area where there is no, for example, domestic player, a major domestic player, is in the area of electrophysiology. There's actually not a company in China that is a domestic player in electrophysiology that's over $15 million US in revenue. So it's things like that if you can establish kind of a beachhead and early on into those markets, for example, in China that don't exist domestically, you're coming in at a good valuation level, and then you can also enjoy the growth that's going to occur.
And by the way, I was a CFO of Microport 12 years ago.
Okay. Young, please.
So I think I could give the general Chinese approach to things, which is we look at everything under the sun, right? So that might not necessarily work here, but I would say there are, when push comes to shove, from an investment standpoint, if you have a great technology with a great market, with a great team that could generate returns, it's something that we would love to take a look at to see whether or not it warrants investment. And what we could bring to the table is help you build a China market, right? So I think, frankly speaking, if we were to boil it down to bare necessities, I would say in the U.S. for investment, right now we're targeting earlier stage proof of concept therapeutic products that's targeting unmet needs either in the U.S. or in China. And on the diagnostics end, on the diagnostic end, we're looking for groundbreaking technology that could push scientific boundaries beyond what they are right now. And with the ultimate goal of saving patients' lives. So, but I think that's kind of the public spiel. Now, the private spiel is, as long if you could, if there's a large market, you're a great guy, you could generate returns for us and our LPs, and we could help you build a China market. That's something that we would certainly be interested in. So.
Great. At my turn, I think yes. When we do this issue of cross-border investments, like in China, we look for the area which have the future development, such as like telemedicine. Lots of people kind of, telemedicine. It has been there for over 20 years, but it really hasn't catch up yet. But look at the population in China and look at the infrastructure of healthcare in China. It's really, they need to catch up, but how? So telemedicine is a very good way to get this healthcare catch up over there. So currently, telemedicine is one of my interests. It's really combined with POCT, point of care testing, and this AI, artificial intelligence. That would be a big market over there. I think so far, all of the questions are over here already asked for our panels. And the next, so if you have any questions, you could ask us. There's maybe 5 minutes. Yeah, please.
Just have a question. It seems like many of the cross-border investors, the first question they ask you, are you willing to work with the Chinese pharma company and help enter the Chinese market? When that thinking, is there a recommendation to try to reach out to Chinese companies if you try to engage in Chinese investors, which, if that is a criteria, comes often suggested?
So you mean to look for, so you said you want to do the strategic partner or financial investor?
Well, usually it comes hand in hand where a Chinese investor will say, well, we'd like you to market your product in China. Are you interested in partnering? And I said, yes, we are.
Uh-huh.
But before we get too deep with the discussions with a Chinese investor, should we try to do outreach to Chinese pharma companies?
Well, I think that's really depends on, because at a different stage, investment stage or different development stage of your company, you really need to have a focus on different partnership. So I feel like it's really, if at very early stage, you like financial partners, but it's the kind of late stage once you want to get into the market. And then you need to think about strategic partners. That's for sure. If you don't have strategic partners, how can you go? I mean, that would be a big helper.
Because I think his question is sort of, do you want us to find them, or are you going to find them for us?
So I think I'll give you a quick hint. So I think it's case by case. There are active investors and passive investors. And you really have to identify what type of investor they are. So from a Life Capital standpoint, we would actively help you try to find a partner in China, right? And if you already have a partner in China, we might be a little more on the edge. Then our expectation is you definitely have to drive for the financial returns, right? For the buy equity, so to make it worthwhile. But I think it's really case by case whether or not they're they're passive or active.
So for us, a lot of the Chinese pharma company, they'll come to this kind of event, or the JP Morgan or the Bio, and all the guys go there all the time. So if you want to work with the Chinese pharma directly, so I would suggest to register this event. So this is I think a very efficient way to know a lot of Chinese companies at one time. Definitely you'll do your DD later on, see which ones are, have a better reputation or can execute. Because a lot of different investors, like Qilu, we are the large pharma. There are also the Star Biotech, also the fund, also a lot of other real estate investors. They have the money, they want to do this. So, but usually, if you go to the BD event or the investor conference, you will meet these guys there. Otherwise, you can work with the financial advisor. So if you know the fund directly, you can also do that way. So, yeah.
Yeah, for medical device companies, actually, we suggest you don't really license your China rights to anybody else in China, because when you actually get acquired, you need to get the China right back. So that really adds a lot of complications. And so for medical device, we suggest you don't really license your China right to anybody. And otherwise, you will impact your value.
Yeah, please.
Can you talk a little bit more about FIRMA implications and workarounds around it, especially if you have LPs with information rights, and how we handle U.S. companies that they don't want to take money from cross-border investors?
What's the question? Sorry.
Could you?
So my question about Firma, specifically there are some.
Firma.
Yeah.
Firma. Okay.
So maybe the implications of that. For example, so I'm an investor side as well. So if you have LPs that have information rights, that would be under subject to Firma, and then, if you have non-US LPs. So how do you see the implications of that when you want to invest in US as a cross-border investor? Yeah.
So I think if you guys don't mind,
Go ahead.
So I think so I think what you're referring to is now whenever investment firms invest in invest in startup companies, they're putting in a Firma clause, correct? That's good. That's a very good question. Like right now, I think it's up in the air. We're still not 100% sure how to. I think we're certainly putting it in just to ensure that the deal is secure. But in reality, we have no idea how Firma is really going to be implicated. So it's more lawyer speak whenever that clause is put in. And frankly speaking, like right now, I mean, from an investor standpoint, I mean, we're deferring Firma and CFIUS type of engagements to our lawyers. And as a matter of fact, at Life Capital, we have several teams of lawyers actually looking at CFIUS and Firma and how to engage it. And all of them come back with the same answer, which is, hey, we still don't know, right? We have to wait until the pilot program kind of figure things out, right? So a lot of, if there is a clause in there, I mean, frankly speaking, you can have your lawyers just confirm whether or not it's open enough for interpretation. But right now, my understanding is not just at Life Capital, but at all the other, even Western investment firms with non-US investors. Because keep in mind, Firma also applies to a European investor, right? If you have an LP in Europe, you still need to go through CFIUS. So, so the idea there is just have your lawyers review it, make sure they understand enough of the CFIUS and Firma type of regulation, so that it's loose enough that you have your wiggle room, but it's tight enough that the investor also has their wiggle room. So.
I mean, have you read this, CFIUS? I mean, it was, I think it was intended to be incredibly broad, so that they could, put it whatever. I mean, I'm dealing with that now with an acquisition, and the lawyers are just going.
Yeah.
So excuse me, I think time is out. Maybe there's another panel discussion going on after this. So if you have questions, we could answer or talk. Thank you.